Right, back where we were with a new blade actuating ring, or not a new one, a new one to this shutter. It'll be as old as the original was. Yep. I'll just have to clean that off. My tweezers have obviously got a little bit of graphite grease or molybdenum or something on them. I've just left a mark on that blade and I'd rather it wasn't there. That's fine. Clean those tweezers off. Well, that was a very unexpected fault, that business of the blade actuating ring having that pin loose. I don't recall ever having seen that. I have seen cases where that pin is damaged because things have been forced. And our cover blade, nope, that just dropped into the wrong place. Yeah, that just flipped into the wrong place there. That got stuck under the next blade instead of over the top. Blade number 1. Blade number 2. Blade number 3. No, don't do that. And our cover blade sitting there correctly this time. Right, I'll swing these blades in slightly, just as before. Lift my shutter case over it, slide it onto that block so it's held down firmly. Yes, we've got blades that open and close correctly. Just as well. 3 case screws. These are countersunk screws. I can see there are still slight marks on those shutter blades, but they are much reduced and I'm not going to worry about them. Tighten those screws up. That all looks good. Now we can start assembling the shutter, the mechanism plate, all the components from the top. So normally what I use is this, which is the front of an old Retina Reflex S, I think, and it's been gutted just to allow me to use it as a table to hold that shutter in place. Makes it much easier to deal with than trying to struggle with it in some other fashion. So our various springs. I'll zoom in a little bit. This spring. I hold a toothpick over the top of that post so that I can't lose my spring. But I pick up the end of the spring and hook it behind the post on this lever over here. Oh, that's not quite tucked down properly. Let's start again. This time we in. That's it. That lever's sprung loaded, that lever's sprung loaded. The spring is seated correctly. That's good. Now the return spring for the B lever goes on this post. There's a groove in that post and it has to sit in that groove. That's it. That's sitting correctly. Next, the B lever. So I'm going to hold back this little tab, slide the blade actuating ring forward if I can, to bring the blades to the open position so that the B lever will sit correctly in the position where it would hold the blades open. I've got to hook this behind that spring because that's the return spring for the B lever. That's just sitting there at the moment, nothing's holding it in place. Next we have this post with the spring on it. This is awkward to get in place because you have to use the funny screwdriver. Let's see if we can do it. Of course my screwdriver is magnetic, so it's lifting things up when I don't want it to lift them up. That's started. Just run that screw down. Check that the B lever moves correctly. It does. I can tighten that screw up. And I need to swing that spring right back around against the centre of the lens tube so that the tail of the spring bears up against this post here. So far so good. If I hold back the B lever with my finger, I can pull the blade actuating ring back into the park position. That's good. So we've got components for the flash sink. Here is a spring, a gear, a pallet gear, the operating lever and the spring basically. I'll just clean those. They are quite clean. Drop the pallet wheel in place on its shaft. That's good. The operating lever with its sector gear on the front. I just want to put a touch of molybdenum paste on the back end of that where it hooks against a catch. So that's just here. that sits on there. Now I'll just swing the catch back out of the way so that the arm will come forward easily. That's good. And I've got my spring, which I need to hook in place, so I'll use my needle nose pliers to hold the spring so I can hook it over its post at that end and pull it across and hook it into the hole on that arm that couples to the detent, no, not the detent, the pallet wheel. That's all working well. What's next? More components of the flash sink. This lever, I'll just lubricate that lightly with a touch of molybdenum. It fits over this post. There's a spring here, so it sort of has to fit under that spring. With a bit of manipulating, it drops into place. And I'm sorry you couldn't see through my finger, but my finger's not transparent, but there you go. To the flash contact itself, making sure that goes in correctly and isn't tucked behind the contact. It's easy to get this hooked up and behind the contact, in which case it doesn't work, as you might well expect. And you can, but the shutter will otherwise work, and you can get the whole camera back together before discovering that you don't have a flash contact that works. So it's worth looking twice for that one. Yeah, it's important that this plate is clean. The levers, particularly this lever at the top, is only operated by a very light spring. It needs to be free to move, and if there's oil or grease behind it, it will not move, it'll just stick there. That looks good. Pull that into the cocked position. Yeah, a little lever underneath this needs to be poking out where I can see it, like that. That's it. So you can see that the little tab here is sticking out, and that this is seated correctly down on its posts. The spring for that arm needs to go on here. The screw has a little shoulder on it that the spring can run around. Be careful to get it in place correctly so that the spring is free around the shoulder of the screw, not screwed down underneath it, because otherwise it doesn't work correctly. Let's do that screw up. Let's mate at the other end. Check that the spring moves freely, and it does. And I've got to hook that spring, lift it up, hook it up behind that arm there. There it is, that's done. So far so good. Our main drive cam, which fits on this post, needs to go on next. If I can lay my hands on it. Where did I put that? Here it is over here. Okay, so my main drive cam I need to clean, and it's spring. Now the spring is, these parts are quite clean already. They probably don't have enough lubricant, enough on them to lubricate them. Normally you would find those smothered in graphite grease. They need some sort of lubricant. Alright, the camera just decided that was an opportune moment to shut down without warning me. I think maybe the battery was a bit flat. I was mentioning that often these components are smothered in graphite grease, usually too much. In this case, this one was relatively dry. It had probably insufficient lubricant. I've just put some molybdenum paste on the contact surfaces of that main cam. Let's get this in position. I'm just putting the bracket on now that holds the spring. I've been waiting for the batteries to charge for my camera, so while that's been happening I've downloaded my previous files and checked exactly where I was up to when the camera shut down. And I've taken the opportunity of cleaning some of the components that I had sitting here waiting to go, so the final assembly should go reasonably quickly. Just getting this main drive spring in place. Alright, let's just cock this and see if it fires. I'll hold back the B lever. Yeah, the shutter fires fine, that's great. Okay, the shutter release lever. I can put that in place. I'll just put a tiny smear of molybdenum on the shaft of that so that it rotates smoothly without excess effort. That drops in this position. Going to make sure it hooks under the B lever, not behind, not on the wrong side of it. And this spring, its return spring, has to come all the way across the top of their flash sync components and hook behind there. Something wrong with my tweezers, I don't seem to be able to get a grip on that. That's better. So there we have it. I'll just check that does the job. Let's cock the shutter. Hold that down, fire it, the shutter's held open, release it and the shutter closes. So the B lever's doing its job, that's all as expected. Now, what else have we not got in? We haven't got our flash sync setting lever in place at the back. So I want to wipe a little bit of molybdenum paste on this little tooth piece here. It acts a little bit like a ratchet. That's where it clicks into place. You hear a little ratchet rasp as you push it into position, and a bit on that spring down in the body, and see if I can hook this thing into position. Where's my pin? Where's the hole? Here's the hole. Where's that spring? Well, it's way down there. Okay. So I need to get that hooked in under there. This is awkward because of that extra piece of insulation on that flash contact. And I've got to get my spring round behind that post there, and it's almost done it. That's correct. That's good. And this goes on here. There's a post that comes through to align it. Press in that little detent so that it drops into place smoothly. And there are 3 screws. In this case they're countersunk head screws. Often they are not. Whatever they are, just make sure the right ones go back in the right place. Okay, let's put that back in our assembly mount. That's all good. Next we want our retard gear train and delay and self timer. I've cleaned those, they're sitting here waiting to be blown off and lubricated with graphite powder. So I'll do that. So I've cleaned these in some naphtha. I'm making sure I blow out all that solvent. And of course, blowing out the solvent, it's also taking any freight of oil or contaminants with it. A bit of graphite powder, and I'll lubricate those and then put them into place. I usually just use a little bit of graphite powder to hold back the pallets and work that in so that all the contacting surfaces of the various gears there are lubricated with that graphite powder. That's all that's required. Likewise the self timer. It just ensures that the teeth roll over each other smoothly. That's all good. I'll blow the excess graphite powder out of these. And get them into place in the shutter. So I need to cock the shutter, which brings the main drive cam clear of the retard gear train. Drop the retard gear train into place. That's held in with 2 screws. Let's get rid of that paper. Should improve the exposure. The screw hole in the retard gear train at this end is oversized relative to the screw, so it means that you can adjust the position of the retard gear train inwards or outwards to allow greater or lesser engagement with the drive cam to control the speeds that the shutter runs at. Let's get this slow speed, this delay action in here, self timer. Yep, why is that not wanting to swing into place? Yep, not playing the game. That's better. All right. That's better, it's just dropped down into position. Get its locating screw in place. Now if we run that down manually, the self time is running down. There's the shutter running, opening and closing. That looks good. So far so good. Here we have the shaft, the cocking shaft for the shutter. It is slightly burred at the end, but that's not going to cause us any problem, I would think. I'll just run a very brief, very slight wipe of molybdenum down that shaft. Put that in place, that's all good. Here's the cocking ring that cocks the shutter mechanism. So we'll just run some molybdenum around the inside surface of that and the outside surface where it runs on the cams, and get this swung into place. So that fits over that top of that post. That's the post that had the that held the B lever in place, that split post. Now I'll just lift this and we'll get this positioned correctly. It should be hooked around that last tooth on there. That's it. That's where it needs to be. That's all good. This catch holds the shutter in the cocked position. That sits in there like that. Here's our shutter speed cam. I've just run some molybdenum around the inside surface and around the cam surfaces where it contacts the retard gear train pin there. And we'll put that in place, making sure the B lever is not trapped underneath it. That's all good. And we'll clip its retainer spring into position. Make sure that's seated. That looks good. Now I've got a tool for cocking the shutter here somewhere. I'll do that using this tool. It's cocked. We'll set it an 1/8 of a second and see what sort of speed it gives us. Much too fast. So we don't have enough engagement of the retard gear train and the main drive cam. What's it like on a quarter? That's more like an eighth. So I'll cock this, I'll fit it in here, and I will adjust the position of the retard gear train to bring it into closer engagement with the cam so that the shutter runs slower. I slacken its fixing screw, move the cam in very slightly, that may have been too much. Set this at 1/8 of a second position, see what we get. Still too fast. So I'll cock the shutter again and go through the same process. That's not my only potential adjustment, because you can also bend the pin on the arm of the retard gear train so that it contacts this cam less or more in order to change the speed. See how we go. On the 1/8 of a second setting. Alright, that was my camera beeping at me for some reason and stopped recording. Perhaps I hit the file size limit again. We've got it set on 1/8 of a second. That's pretty good. If anything, I'd say that was slightly slow. I'm going to go and test that on my tester and then I'll be back.